Get started. It's really, really good to see this many people here. And so our session this afternoon is a conversation series on teaching what to do so that your course doesn't suck. And that certainly is an interesting title. And I'd like to say I'd take credit for this whole idea, but I can't. I just got asked to chair it. But I really like the idea where you have people who have really good stories to tell, telling them. And we did do a bit of debriefing. I wouldn't call it rehearsing. We did call it I would call it debriefing, where I know some of the points these people want to make, and they are very real, and I think will add a lot of value to today. So I want to start off by saying who I am just very briefly, and I wish I had more time to say something else, but I don't. But there's lots of times I think we don't take enough time to learn from each other, and I think this is a really good example because everybody has had something happen in a course experience where I wish I could back up that time. Maybe I will tell you. So Renee's sister was in my class about 10 years ago, and I was passing out a midterm, and I saw Billy Streen 5 minutes after that, and it was one of those moments where you realize that you really are a loser, where a student put her hand up and said, "I think I have the answer key," and turns out everybody had the answer key. Oh. But it was only for pages 3 through 7 or something. And I totally freaked. And that was sort of the time that I thought, I'll never recover this class ever again. And I saw you in the copy lineup about a day later, and I was still white. Anyway, so these people have great stories to tell you too. But before I start, I'd like to just maybe find out who all's here. So, for example, how many of you are students? Very good. How many of you are instructors? How many of you are associate deans? Okay. We won't go. I just want to out you a little bit. So what I'm going to start off by doing is having our panel introduce themselves and maybe tell you one of their stories about what they think of when they hear this title from their own experience. So we'll start off with Clive Hickson from Elementary Education.
Good afternoon, everyone. I teach in, as Frank said, the elementary education program for teachers. And one of the stories I'd just like to share with you is something that I tell my students in my class, is that I can remember back to when I was a teacher in the high school system, teaching physical education. And I did my teaching practica in London, just outside of a Dockland area in London, and extremely rough, extremely tough school, extremely so. I had 4 students whose parents were in incarceration for murder or those kind of cases. So it was a very, very difficult situation I found myself in. And I was a student teacher at the time, and I knew that sharing equipment would cause a problem with the students. And so I had this great gymnastics lesson planned, all the skills and activities, etc. But I was really concerned about giving out the equipment, particularly the mats. So I had this wonderful idea on the spot that 1 mat per child. The class was approximately 45 minutes in length, and I think it took me close to 30 minutes just to get all the mats out on the floor. We put out so many mats, I think I covered every single inch of the gymnasium floor. And by the time we achieved that and all the students were sitting on the mats, it was terrible in the fact that there was no student engagement because the first person who put out the mat had been sitting there for 25 minutes or so. And at that stage I realized if it's taken us 25 minutes to take the mats out, it's going to take us that long to put the mats away. So at that stage I realized I had to quit my lesson plan and start the putting away of the equipment. And so I did that, and then I thought I saved the whole of the lesson by making this grand statement at the end to this group of 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds. And I said, now, you all know how to take out the equipment, so next day I can get on with my teaching. And I thought that saved myself. But really, that was something that I learned tremendously from. And sometimes I think you have to go through the sucking part to realize what you've got to do better in the future. So I tell that story because I don't wish you to think that we're sitting here as experts and it never happens to us. It sure does, and I think we might be able to share some stories about that. As I said, I tell my elementary education students that story, and I normally teach classes around about 30 to 40 to 45 students, and I've taught this particular course maybe around about 60 or so times at the university level. So that's where my experience will come from in some of my comments, etc.
Alex?
Okay, I don't know how
Alex
I follow
Brown
up.
is from chemistry.
I don't know how I follow that up. So, as Frank just said, I'm Alex Brown, and I'm an associate professor and associate chair of undergrad from the chemistry department. I've been here about 10 years, and I teach classes ranging from advanced graduate courses with 5 to 10 students, all the way to undergraduate courses with 400 students. So I pretty much run the gamut from the start to the end. And I think Clive hit one of the nails on the head, which always surprises students when I tell them that I wasn't hired into this job to be a teacher. I was hired to do research. And it's one of the things that surprises them, that we don't have formal training, at least at most Canadian institutions, on the teaching aspect. What we have is we have people who are really interested in the teaching aspect. They realize it's extremely rewarding. It's one of the things that is really a joy to do as part of this job. And they come out to events like this and learn. And I think one of the stories I'll relate to is probably from the beginning, when I really thought that teaching was just that other part of my job. And I never thought a lot about assessment. And I thought, well, you can slap together an exam in a few hours for a final exam. And I put together this beautiful exam, or so I thought. It all looks good. You know, I went to the gymnasium with my 250 students. I handed it out. It seemed to be going well. You know, you pace around and you can't tell if it's going good or poorly. And then at the end, I was surrounded by 20 or 30 of the students who I actually knew in this big class of 250, meaning that they're often the good students who came to see you for extra help. And they said, Dr. Brown, problem 7, it was so hard. Can you tell us how it was done? And then I looked at the problem and I said, well, actually, it can't be done. And what I realized was that the good students thought it was the real challenging problem, that this was the test. This was going to be the difference between their B and their A in the course. The poor students just blindly solved it and were happy with their answer, but their answer was meaningless. And so it was a real wake-up call to me that you really have to be careful about your assessment and make sure that everything is going to work at times, certainly on the final exam. Because if you don't, it kind of leaves you emotionally scarred for the next time you give an exam, and everyone seems so happy about it. So hopefully we'll tell you a few failures and hopefully a few successes over the coming hour or so.
Our third person is Candide Sloboda from nursing.
Hi, I'm Candy, and I'm in nursing. I've been teaching almost forever, a good 30 years. I teach only in the undergraduate program. I've taught everything from first year to fourth year to the post-RN program, and really enjoy teaching. I think the first thing that comes to my mind to that question is how well prepared you have to be as a teacher. And I remember maybe 3 years after I started teaching, I had my lectures all prepared, and on the way in from St. Albert, I was rear-ended. And so, of course, I was anxious to get here because I had to teach my class. And so the guy said, I didn't have any money with me neither. And he said, well, you know, don't worry about your car. We'll get you a taxi and get you there. So I got in my taxi and came, forgot my briefcase in my car. And so I came and I had nothing to teach with. And so I had to ad-lib the whole, it was a three-hour lecture. So I had to ad-lib all this way through, and it sure brought the lesson home to me how well prepared you have to be, because those things do happen.
Okay, so what I'd like to do for the next little while is we've got a list of prepared questions that if everybody's very quiet, we can go through. But I'd like to open it up to you for questions as well. And I feel a little bit like Oprah here, but if we have a bit of controversy, it's good too. And so certainly if you want to ask questions, and if you want to challenge each other on questions, if we have time for that, that's great. we have the room for an hour, but also if they kick us out of here, we could probably still continue on a conversation in the hallway if we have to. So even though it's formally an hour, we might still be able to carry on high-quality dialogue too. So one of my questions then is, and I'm going to ask these to all three of you, and you can sort of duke it out who goes first, but what is the number one most important thing you think you have to deal with in making sure your course doesn't suck? What's the number one thing you have to take care of?
I can start.
Go ahead.
I can start with the bold statement I gave at our little debrief, and this is a PG-13 statement, but it's a very simple statement, which is, don't be an asshole. That is a very simple fact of making your course not suck, in that you have to be human. You have to treat these students with respect when they come and see you. You have to, if it's office hours, you have to take their concerns seriously, whether they're questions about the course or the way the course is running. If you say you're going to respond to email, you should do so in some reasonable fashion. Don't just let it accumulate and ignore it. These are people. They're spending good money, I'll say that. Maybe that's controversial. But your job, or part of our job, is to help them get the education they deserve. And so you really have to take a lot of time to spend with these students about their issues. And so and I think that sticks with you for a long time. If you start off on the wrong foot in your career, your reputation goes with you for a long time. I think I was lucky. I got a reputation early on as of being accessible. And so students would come to see me in office hours and felt I was going to take their questions very seriously and answer them to the best of my ability. But then I have other colleagues who are busy at the start of their careers, and they feel that, well, maybe the teaching is taking up too much time, and I'm going to brush off students. And quickly that reputation follows you for a long time, and it takes a lot of effort on your part to get beyond that reputation you get early on. So that's my one take-home message.
Mine is you have to be excited about what you teach. You have to make students feel like this is just a great course that they're coming into, and that you are just so thrilled to be there to teach them, and that you're there to help them learn. That is your main reason for being there, is to help them learn.
The one thing I would say, and I just use one word, is care. You know, you've really got to care about your subject area, your content, etc. You've got to care about how you teach. But also, I think you need to care about the students, care about their learning. I think too often we often associate a student not being successful onto the student's shoulders, when there's times when we could look at ourselves and how we're teaching, etc. And one of the hats I wear, other than being an instructor, is I'm an associate dean, and I deal with all the undergraduate programs and services in the Faculty of Education. And the times when I find that there's difficulties between an instructor and student tends to be when the student feels like the instructor doesn't have any time for them, or has not really paid much attention to what the course is supposed to be about. And that's when the issues tend to arise between student and instructor, and that's when I think the reputation, as you said, Alex, certainly starts to be that, well, this is a course that doesn't really matter, or this professor really doesn't care about what's going on in the course. And one of my graduate students talks about teacher immediacy. In other words, you know, how available are you to your students? And what he does, and I think it's great, and I haven't actually plucked up the courage to do it yet, but he actually, for the first 2 weeks of class, he actually meets every student at the door to say hello to them and welcome them to the classroom. And he'll make a point in saying goodbye to them at the end of class too. And as I said, I haven't had the courage to do that yet, but I think it's finding those little tricks to reach out to students and to show that you care about them, and you care that they chose to be in your section or your course, because I think that means a tremendous amount to students. And I think it's something that we can easily forget when we've got our course materials and we kind of like, I'm going to use a phrase, we kind of hide behind our course materials. It's like, well, this is the content you just have to learn. I don't have to have that relationship with you. And I tend to think the power of your influence and the power of the course and that comes down to the kind of relationships you start to build with the students. And it's different between being in small classes and large classes. I absolutely acknowledge that. But I think there's always little tricks that we can do to bring things in. And as I'm talking, I can see some people nodding in the audience. And I think it's finding those tricks to show that you care about your subject area, your content, the way you teach the students themselves. And I think that can certainly put you on that road to students turning around and say to their friends, their peers, take the course with so-and-so. It's a great course, you learn lots, and she or he is great to get as a teacher or instructor. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what we want. We want the learning, but we also want them to realize that, you know what, this was a great experience for me.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
The positive reinforcement you get when a student in your second or third year course comes to you and says, I'm only taking this course because I took your introductory course with 300 people and I really enjoyed it and I liked what your approach was, and they've come back to you, just like Clive says. They're there for the new material, but they're also there because you had that good experience and they had that good experience in their first impressions of you when you taught in these large introductory courses.
So what I'm hearing are very human traits as being the important part, which is something, if you stop and think about, the U of A brands itself as a research-intensive university. And as an administrator, I absolutely hate that because I think we are a research and teaching-intensive university. When I hear the three of you say that, I really do think that. And then also as a parent of two kids going here right now, they say they both went to another university in this town for their first year. And we expected that they would stay at that other university for more than 1 year. And one of them stayed for 2. But they came here, and the general consensus in our house is what you're saying is more apparent here than it was at the other university. So I think I really like what you had to say. So,
Can I just interject? I don't know if you've ever heard the advertisement on the radio, etc., about some of our local competitors, etc., but one of the ways they advertise themselves is be in classes with professors who care. So that's how some people advertise.
okay, we're going to go to a question from the audience.
So you talked a bit about reputation of the organization as an instructor.
Yeah.
What can you do with, or what would you advise if you're realizing that things aren't going well? You're teaching a section, and maybe you want to start off on the right foot, but things aren't turning out the way you planned. You don't have a rapport with the students, or something that you think is a good idea clearly isn't working for you. How do you change course while still coming across as genuine when you're trying to change the way they're focused?
I get a lot of feedback from my students.
Yeah.
I usually get informal feedback every 2 weeks. I do it in different ways. Sometimes I have a sheet that I call Beefs and Bouquets, and I put a picture of a cow and a picture of a bouquet on it, and I hand it out, and I get informal feedback from them. Sometimes when I was looking at this, now I have a thing that I have a rock band, and then I have a soother for sucks, and I give that out, and I get feedback. And then I take that feedback after I look at it, I take it back to the class and say, okay, obviously this isn't working. This is how you would like it to be done. And I really work at meeting their needs to learn, because I say, I am here to help you learn. That is my sole purpose. You can love me, you can hate me, whatever, but I'm here to help you learn. I also look at really using my office hours. And so I really say to students, okay, when are you available? And then I see if I can set my office hours around their availability. And I get them to come to me. I often will have treats in my office. They get a treat when they come to see me. I do lots of things to get them in to see me. When a student is doing poorly, I give a lot of quizzes that don't count, and they mark them themselves. And I'll say, if anybody got this back, I can help you. If you just come to my office and see me, mouth to mouth, we can do a lot. And so I feel I am, really progressing with my students when my office hours are full.
So I think you have already done the first thing. If you as the instructor assess that something isn't going right in the process of teaching the course. That is the first step, because there's many of us who never get to that step. It's just we're going to do whatever we're going to do. And I think Candy's right that getting feedback is, I think, you know, the USRI scores that they fill out at the end are useful, but they're not useful for the students you're teaching. And it's one of the first things I say on day one is to my students is that you telling me 3 months from now something you didn't like in the course does you no good. What it does is help the students who come after you. And so going to this rapid feedback, I'm a computer guy, so I use Moodle, lots of anonymous surveys where I will ask basic information, and the students are very good at giving feedback about what is going right and what is going wrong. And sometimes it's not bad if, depending on your course, for many of my courses, I have teaching assistants, and sometimes they are a good bridge between the students and me. Students don't feel comfortable telling me directly what's going right or wrong in the course, but sometimes they're happy to tell my teaching assistants too, who happen to be in the room for one of my courses, and they will often be very frank with the graduate students about what they don't like in the course, and that will get passed on to you. And again, your teaching assistants, if you have them, have to be comfortable enough to talk to you about what is going right or wrong.
And very similar to what Alex and Candy have already said, one of the things I utilize quite frequently in my courses is, and again, it's a smaller group of like 30 to 40 students rather than 400, is that after a couple of weeks, I will just inform the class members that I'm going to be leaving like 10 minutes before the end of class. But up at the front or along the sides, there's a whole number of different whiteboard pens, etc. And I just want you to answer these questions. And I have the questions listed on the boards at the beginning of class. And I ask them for feedback on those things. And I think that and then I do leave, and the students can write, and then I come back in and I can see the feedback. So it's all anonymous. I haven't seen any exam papers or anything like that yet to match up handwriting or anything. And I find it's a quick and easy way to find out what is happening in your class. I like that because it gives me that initial understanding. I find that by asking questions, though, I get the level of specificity that I want, rather than, yeah, good job. Well, good job doesn't tell us anything other than, well, maybe I wore coordinating clothes today or something like that. You know, the specificity enables me to now zero in on things. So to go back to your question, the first thing to do is don't carry on doing what you're already doing. Because if you're realizing it's not working, that, as Alex said, is the first step. The second step is to change. But you need feedback to know what to change. You might need to solicit the help from students. You might need to facilitate getting help from maybe a peer or someone to come into your class, to watch, listen, to look at what the students are doing while you're teaching, etc., so that that person can then give you a little bit of feedback too. So I think the idea is to gather feedback from as many different sources as you can, and then start to see what you can do about it. I would then recommend that you actually say to the students, this is something I've been sensing, and so this is what I'm going to do to try to change things. I find the more upfront you are with students, the better it is. And actually, you will get students come to you at the end of class and then say, that was great, I like that, yeah, keep doing that. Or, you know what, I was thinking it was more to do with this. And so you're getting more specific feedback again. And I know it sounds really hokey and things like that, but sometimes I pick on certain people in the class beforehand, and I just say, I need you to give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or sideways about whether you're understanding anything. And you know what? The students do it. They really do it. You'll be sitting there and you'll be saying something, and you'll see a student sitting there like this. Or they'll be like that. And it's like, oh, okay, And it just gives you that little bit of a visual feedback. And I know it sounds, oh yeah, you wouldn't do that. I do it, and it works. And you say, oh, it sounds like elementary school. No, it works with us as adults. You know, I do things in the gymnasium, and I still say, okay, I need everyone over here, 5, 4, and everyone is sprinting across the gymnasium to get in. And everyone thinks that's what you do with young children, but we're just bigger young children. You know, so find those little tricks to find the specificity of what you can change, and then be brave enough to change, because the worst thing is just to carry on doing what you're already doing.
So Clive, some of us are bigger, but we have bad knees, so I wouldn't want to do that. So when I think about times when courses suck, I think about times when I get too busy and pulled into teaching or administration, you start cutting corners. And so you've talked about some of the human qualities that make a good teacher. What are some of the organizational things that come to mind first that you have to do if your course is going to be successful?
Well, I think you have to set aside time for teaching. Just as we always set aside time for our research, I think we have to set aside time for considering our teaching. And it's not just the planning before, it's the reflection afterwards that's so important, because that will enable you to know where to go to in the future, perhaps. So I think we have to set aside a period of time to just really think about what we're doing in the classroom with our students. So that is important, and that time needs to be well spent thinking about your planning and what your delivery methods might be, or your approaches in your classroom, so that you're doing different kinds of things within your time frame. And then also thinking about plan A, B, and C. And I'll just share a story with you. In my undergraduate experiences as an undergraduate student, I was training to become a physical education teacher in England, and our cohort was put on, we had to go to the local swimming pool, so we got on a coach bus, and there was about 30 of us on the bus, and we were all expecting to go and do some peer teaching and just do some swimming work, stroke technique ourselves. And we got to the swimming pool, and the 30 of us all started to get up to go into the swimming pool, the recreation center, and the 2 instructors both stood up at the same time and said, "Where are you going?" And we said, "The swimming pool?" And they said, "No, swimming pool's closed. Now what are you going to do? How are you going to do your peer teaching? What resources have you got with you today to be able to handle that?" And that's always stuck with me over close to 30 years ago, that you need to not only have your plan, but your backups too, in case those things don't work in the class. What can I change to? And our cohort, we never ever turned up to another class again without different plans. The unfortunate thing is we never got to ask that question again, but it told us that you must be planned and have those kind of backup things to move to change to.
So I guess I'll add to Clive's comment about one of the things to set aside is time after your lectures. I mean, I think we all, or many of us, set aside half an hour to an hour in that block right before a lecture. I mean, I know for me, I go in some meditation zone in my room to prepare for giving my lecture, but then once a week or so I try to schedule that I'm not sprinting off to the next meeting or the next meeting with one of my graduate students or some research thing, to think about how did that lecture go, because it's very easy to forget how a lecture went. You finish, you sprint off to a meeting, and then you think, did that lecture go well or did that lecture go poorly, and you can't remember because you've forgotten. I don't know. My short-term memory is disappearing, I think. So. The other one is, I was very big on this and still am, I compartmentalize my teaching. So for example, email from students has to have the course name in the title, and that for me gets it fed off to a mailbox that I deal with at certain, I'm going to answer student emails at this hour of the day. And they know that they will be, if they send me an email at 8 in the morning, it probably won't get answered until the evening or whatever time slot I've set around for dealing with emails or the discussion forum if you've done that in Moodle. And for me, I did a lot of my teaching early on and still do at night. I can get a lot by with less sleep, so I will often do a lot of my teaching work between the hours of 8 p.m. and 1 in the morning. Because if you're here, probably you're passionate about teaching, and it can consume your entire life when you're young or old. But most of us have other parts of our jobs. We've heard some of our associate deans here, and so you have to sometimes figure out when are the hours going to be that you spend on teaching. So I've done that by putting it into very compartmentalized blocks of time, and that's how I manage to keep myself somewhat sane.
The way I plan my classes, I don't call them lectures because I don't lecture a lot of the time, as I plan them sort of all ahead. So I have a plan of all my classes, and then I look at what different strategies I'm going to use for different classes, so that I like to make each class that I teach a surprise for the students. And I try to do something different every class. And I've had students say to me, I come to class just to see what you're going to do today. And that's what makes it exciting for them. I also make time after every single class that I teach, and I take 10, 15 minutes and I take Post-it notes and I put on it what I thought went really well, what I wouldn't do again, what my thoughts are right now of how I do it differently, so that next year if I'm teaching it again, I come back to it and I have those notes ahead of time, and I know what I'm going to already change.
So sometimes we talk about getting bored with teaching courses too many times. Tell them how many times you've taught your classes.
Oh, some of them I've maybe taught 30 times.
And some of mine I've taught like about 60 times. I think that also the one thing I try to use to my advantage is that at the end of every course I try to update, change, or modify all of my teaching materials. So even if I've got a section coming up after Christmas, they're not receiving exactly the same. And so there's always something different. And that change, staying current, I think is really important, because it goes back to that saying of like, you may have taught 60 sections, but if you taught one section 60 times, or if you taught it 60 times, so we can use the same materials and not change. And then I think that's when students all of a sudden realize that this PowerPoint presentation or this piece of information is dated back to the 1960s or something. But we've all seen that, haven't we? And sometimes it's relevant because it stood the test of time, and that research is a pivotal piece of work that you want to bring into your teaching, which is fine. But I think we have a responsibility to the students, because I think when they come in, they don't necessarily, I don't think they expect you to just regurgitate what you taught 5 years ago. I think they want you to stay current and to have at your fingertips the latest pieces of knowledge, etc. So I try to do that at the end of each course I teach.
I'm going to open this up to people out here who want to ask questions of anybody or particular people.
I think that's what makes teaching really fun. Like even when I've taught a course for many, many times, I change it all the time. And my husband often says to me, I go to bed, he says, I go to bed to sleep, but you go to bed to think of how you're going to change things. And I don't know if that's a trait of women, but that's when I have my bright ideas, is when I wake up at 2 o'clock in the night and I think, oh, that's what I'm going to do, that class sort of thing. And that's what makes teaching exciting, is all the changes you can make and how you can improve things.
Okay, one question over here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I've taught the introductory course of 300, and what surprises me the most in the Faculty of Science, and this is a second-term course, is how quickly our students think they know what a university course is about. And that is, so I've tried to do interaction and have them work on projects, even or projects on problems in a class of 300. And I'll admit I've only tried this the first time, last time, so there's a lot of self-reflection that went on about what went right and what went wrong. But many of them came in with the anticipation that they would show up, I would speak through my PowerPoint slides, and they would go home. And they could sleep or do whatever they're going to do. And then when I said, oh no, I'm going to put up a problem and you have 10 minutes to work on it, there was a group who said, well, this is really neat. I like this approach. I'm going to work. This is my chance to do my homework with the professor here to ask questions to. And then the other half said, I'm not paying good money to work on my own problems. You're supposed to get up there and show me how they're done on the PowerPoint, and then I'm supposed to follow that. And so I think one of the hardest things we have to work on is that convincing students that what you do is a useful approach, even though it may not be the same as everybody else's approach. And that's a real tough thing to do. I mean, and you know, we talk about getting these more interactive things in large classes. But the problem is that a number of our students are convinced that that's not what they're paying money to have. And I don't know, and this is one of the things I've reflected on, is how do I get them invested in this being a good approach, that, you know, me telling them stuff is not enough, that they actually have to be involved in the material. And I know for me that's the biggest challenge I'm going to face when I go back into the big class, because for me it was also more exciting. It's also terrifying because you don't know what's going to happen. And it's very hard to go into a lecture when there's in front of 300 kids and there's some preparation, but you don't know which direction it's going to go. And I, again, haven't figured that out either.
I think it's a very good question. I think there's times when the different sizes of class certainly impact our approaches, without a doubt. But I think as an instructor, it's our responsibility to look at ways that we can engage students, and engage them with the content, engage them with the learning. And it's hard, but on the other hand, we certainly know that when students are engaged with the content and the learning, they're going to take more from it. And so we have to find ways to reach out to them. I know it's difficult, and some students don't want to do that, but I think this is the way we're moving with our knowledge systems. And also, there's not this just one-way flow of materials now. And the more that we're all on side with that, I think it will be better for our university as a whole. I do respect that there's always the need for individual differences and things like that, but I don't think it's a problem, even with the size of 300 students. And I do presentations to, you know, not necessarily class courses, but presentations to that number of people, and, you know, just share 2 ideas with the person sitting next to you. You know, and I'm going to ask for some people to share those back out, and I give the people warning. And yeah, the first few times it's tough, but the more you do it, the more the students get into it. So I think, you know, try things to engage, so it isn't just this one-way flow of information, because I don't tend to agree that that's a very effective model.
I'm very fortunate because I teach small classes, so the biggest class I would have would be 60 unless I'm doing a guest lecture. So with 60 you can do lots of things, right? I think it's easy.
I have known of people who will, throughout their course in a large lecture theatre, involve students in, like, as panel members up in the front of the lecture theatre. So they, as panel members, have the responsibility to come up with questions to be asked and to be answered either by the person leading the session or members of the audience. So, and they change those panel members consistently throughout the course. So there are some tricks to these things that maybe people can start to utilize.
Okay, I have one more then. If you have questions, put your hands up, but I have one more in the meantime. So let's just say you've taught the same course for like 20 years, and you're kind of bored, and you want to do something totally radical, but you aren't sure it's going to work, because there's a pretty good chance that it, people might think it's different and then judge you by it. How do you work with a population of students that first time to build confidence that you're going to do an extreme course makeover and have them be a positive experience and not a fighting change thing? You ever done that? If it sounds personal, it's because I think about that a lot.
I usually say to my class, this class is not going to be like anything you're used to. It's going to be different, but I guarantee you're going to learn. And I'm going to do things that you might think are outrageous, but they'll stick in your head. And I always say the theory is hard to stick in your head, but stories and experiences, they are the connecting things. So I do all kinds of things. So for example, when I teach, in nursing you can do many things because everything is related to a patient, right? So when I teach postpartum care, I come to class in a house coat and my hair all a mess, and I say, okay, this is exactly how the postpartum woman feels. Exactly, okay? They haven't slept for nights, etc. And you do things like that, and it sticks. I've had the student come to me like years later and say, I can remember that postpartum course, that postpartum class. So, I try anything and everything.
No, I think you have to be upfront. I think, again, that going back to my course, my introductory course I changed, I don't know if I was upfront enough with the students. I also discovered about planning because, well, at the time the university was pushing the iClicker very hard for generating interaction. So I said, okay, I'm going to use iClickers in my introductory course, and there's 350 students, and the first lecture, you're going over the syllabus. I'm telling them, we're going to try iClickers, and then a hand goes up, and I go yes, and Dr. Brown, they sold out in the bookstore. And then I call the bookstore, and they're like, well, you should have told us that you're going to have a class of 300 with iClickers. And I said, I thought this was the university's platform for engagement, and you tell me you only stock 20 of them? But that turned out. So it was a slow-moving month while they slowly got them stocked in, and then, of course, half the students were lost. Because, not lost, but they weren't engaged from the beginning. Because they were trying to be engaged, but I didn't get the feedback from them until about 3 or 4 weeks into the course. And I also discovered that being upfront with them was also important because I think the day after I said there was going to be this interactive part and you have to show up to class, it's important, 20 students dropped out and moved to another section of introductory chemistry because they really didn't want to be part of this experiment. I did have a smaller number who came in, but a number just said, I don't want to be part of this. And it's the thing about an introductory course, there's places for them to go. But even in a more senior courses, if you're upfront with them, I think the senior students are also more willing to give you their feedback. The introductory students feel that maybe they don't have the opportunity to tell you what they think about whether it's going right or wrong.
I would certainly agree with those things of being upfront and clear with the students, and I would take it perhaps one step further in stating why you're making the changes to the students, so they're understanding. And then to let the students know, and this is how it's going to be handled. Particularly if you're bringing in like a new assignment or new assessment, etc. Students often get concerned that they're going to be like the test group, and no one really wants to be the test group because they know that, oh gosh, it may not work. So if I'm bringing in a new assignment or a new way of doing things, I will state why I'm doing that, what kind of feedback it's based on, etc. And then this is how it's going to be handled throughout the course. So they can see the clarity and the connections, and they can understand they won't be that, oh, okay, we're just the testers for this. So I try to take away any of the anxiety in that regard, because I think when students realize there's change, they tend to think that it will impact them negatively. and I try to accentuate the positive side of things. This is why, this is the feedback, and this is how I think it's going to improve the course or your learning, etc., etc.
What I'm hearing then is you are supporting them through the change so that they know they're supported. You have a question over here?
Well, yeah, not a question or statement, but for me, one of the aspects that hasn't really come up is what your assumptions are relative to the amount of private time students can use along with each lecture. I mean, I still tend to have that ideal that for every 50 minutes I spend in the classroom, very soon afterwards, the students, most students will spend at least half an hour, maybe an hour, checking up on stuff that's come up in the lecture, visiting the textbook, that sort of thing. And so you commented on motivating people using clickers and stuff like that, and I certainly thought about that this last summer because there's a new system up top that they've been promoting a little bit. But in the end, I decided that's a distraction. And the students have got to be motivated. They're the ones who are paying the money. They're the ones that have the grades on the line. We shouldn't have to motivate them. Right? I mean, we've got to be good lecturers and obviously responsible and prepared. But how far do we have to go to? I mean, we've got a class of, I've got 150. I've got quite a bit of material to get. So I just do not have the time to sort of access individual people and cater to their particular individual learning styles. It's always contradictory. I get, the course evaluations there'll be 15 people who say they hate this aspect of the course, and other 15 say they really like that part of the course. And so it's kind of bewildering. But in terms of motivation, I feel it's got to come from them, not me.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I will speak to the iClicker part. One of the other reasons I liked it in terms of motivation is that students here want to know where they sit. And when you give them a problem and they realize that 35% of their colleagues and peers know how to solve it and they don't, that's a pretty strong motivator. So it's a very low stakes feedback to themselves, right? So it's I think it's useful for me, right? Because again, as you say, there's things you have to cover, and of course sometimes you give a problem and no one seems to get it. But then you go back and you do it and you hope that more of them get it. But if they don't, what do? I post the results and I say, well, here are 6 sample problems you can see in the textbook. Here are other things you can look at, and I point them in the direction where they have to go and pursue it. And then I feel my job is done. I can't continually, ask for whether they're doing poorly or not poorly, but what it gives me is guidance of what direction I should point them in. So, I mean, I think there's that aspect that we can use.
One of the things I share with my class is like a cartoon, and in the first caption, there's a young man sitting at home with his feet up, eating chips or something like that, and his mother is saying to him, "Don't you have an exam next week? Shouldn't you be preparing for that?" And he said, "Yeah, it's next week, Mum." In the next caption, it's he's playing or doing something like with a band with his friends or whatever, and one of them says, "Oh, I didn't think you would be here tonight because don't you have an exam on Wednesday?" And he said, "Yeah, it's still 2 days away. I've got plenty of time." And in the last caption, he's on the bus on the way to like college or university, and he's getting these books out his bag, and he's saying to himself, "I'll start reading at the next traffic light." And so I share that with my class, and I say, I can't control what you do outside of class, but here's my expectations of what you should be doing if you want to get a really good mark in this class. You need to take the E-class materials or Moodle materials, etc. You need to take your readings, you need to take your notes from class, and you need to put those together. That takes time. Now that's your choice. I can't make you do that. But know when I'm marking, that's the standard that I'm looking for. And so I try to be open and honest with that. But I always show that cartoon, and I hope it kind of resonates with people about their responsibilities rather than my responsibilities in that regard. Sorry, Candy.
I always think of when I was doing my graduate studies and I was taking a course on instructional methods, and Dr. Basai was this very short quite plump elderly gentleman. And he always said to us, in any given class, you have 25% of your class that is very motivated. They really don't need a teacher. They just need someone to come to with them when they're having problems. And in every class, you have about 20% that are totally unmotivated. But you have that 55% that are not motivated but are motivatable. And that is your responsibility as a teacher, he always used to say us. And he said that 20% that isn't motivated, he said, I could stand on my head stark naked and they wouldn't even see me, he said. So don't worry about those. It's those motivatable ones that is your responsibility as a teacher. And he said that story over and over again to us in that class.
I think, unfortunately, in a way, the course evaluations always motivate you towards the kind of that fraction of the class, the ones that keep flogging away trying to get people motivated. And I can relate to your statement there about putting things together. The kind of statements I get on my course evaluation makes me despair. Can we even say a thing like that, putting things together? It seems to be like, tell me what word I need to be able to regurgitate on quiz. I know that 75% of the students are very capable of putting things together and know what you mean by that. But by virtue of course evaluations, I find that so much of my time goes into that puzzle of, well, how do I do the ones that I don't even know what it would mean to put things together?
Yeah. It's an excellent question. I think when we're faced with those kind of things, maybe providing examples back to the students of, okay, here's a question, and can you answer this question straight from just the notes from today? Probably find that you can answer part of it, but not all of it. And this is where your reading at home or the E-class notes or whatever come into play. And so I'm wondering whether we can provide examples to students about how to put things together in that case, so that they're at least leaving with the knowledge of, oh, these are not just separate entities. I need to integrate that understanding. And I wonder, when we put things out in front of students, sometimes you see those light bulbs go off. And I think too often it's easy for us to kind of think, well, the 20% won't get it. Well, maybe they won't, but that doesn't mean that we still can't keep trying. Exactly. And I think what we need to do is just find ways to keep illustrating to students, well, here's an example. Like, just as we mentioned earlier, I do provide like practice exam questions and things like that. But I don't get them to write the exam, the question out. I'll just say, create a framework with a partner for the next 3 minutes. All the major bullet points that you will cover. And now, where do you get that, where do you need to go to get that information to expand on that? And I find that helps the students start to prepare better, etc. So.
Okay, we're down to the last 5 minutes. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, I do. Okay, you do. Go ahead, Billy.
I'm amazed we've gotten this far without, other than Frank's original remarks, without touching anything about assignments or evaluation. And I'm wondering what you can say about having your course not suck relative to what's important to do in terms of communication around assignments and evaluation.
I give out all that information very first class. So very first class, students have got everything that they need to know about how this course is being assessed, what kind of requirements are going to be, etc. And I provide all that information up front, Bill, so that the one thing as an associate dean I hear quite often from students is, I had no idea how I was doing in the course. You know, I didn't get the course information, the assignment information we didn't get until a week before the assignment date, etc. And I always find that's very problematic for students. So in my personal teaching, I've tried to take that to heart and always ensure that everything goes out at the very beginning. And I tell students when I give them back exams and assignments, there's writing all over it. There is, you know, and I tell them I'll use a different color pen than what you will use so it stands out. And I said, don't worry, I'll write good things as well as, you know, the not so good things. But I will write all over it. But that's, I believe, part of the responsibilities of teaching is not just to give the mark, it's to ensure that, and we never, you know, we hope that it happens, but we ensure that students are taking what your comments are to further their learning. You know, so it's not just assessment of learning, it's assessment for learning. And so that's two ways I try to do. Clarity at the beginning, and then that ongoing kind of information back, which is more than just a mark, it's lots of other things.
So I guess I'll add to that, saying that for the science courses I teach, one of the big things is I think that students feel that it's fair if the exams reflect the assignments. And reflect in the sense that the skills that they build and the tools that they learn by doing the assignments are then evaluated or assessed on the examinations. And one of the ways that I make this clear is that, you know, I post sample exams, but I also post solutions to the exams in the course. And for every question, I will have a solution, but I also point out the 1 or 2 or 3 key concepts that question is examining. And sometimes that's either just a list, or it points to actually, in my introductory course, this example is analogous to example 5.2 from lecture 3. And then they go and they say, this question earlier about how do you get them to integrate, they see, wait a sec, this question wasn't, you know, it was hard, but what it did is it took this concept from lecture 3 and this concept from lecture 7 and put them together. And when they see that feedback, they also feel that usually, not always, that they've been assessed fairly, that this isn't just a question that was pulled because it was hard, it was pulled because you thought it was going to put together 2 or 3 concepts that you emphasized during the course building up to the examination.
In our faculty, we have to have all the assignments in the course outline, and then we have to have a broader, or I should say more specific assignments have to be on E-class before we start classes. So it's all right there. In each of our theory classes, we have to have one paper, we have to have a final exam, and we have to have one other way of measurement. So the students are very used to sort of what they get in every theory class. I teach by objectives. So every class I have the objectives for the class, and so I say to the students, that's what you're going to be examined on, is relation to those objectives. So I usually don't give out a sample exam or anything. I just say, when they say, can we have can we have a review or whatever, I said, go back to the objectives for each class. And I tell them that right up front. I said, if you want to know what's going to be in the exam, you write down the objectives. That's what it's going to be. I'm not here to fool you. An exam is just a sample of what you know, and so it's all going to be related to those objectives.
I don't know if this makes sense to you. Do you know what a concept map is for your course? If you don't, I'll just quickly talk about it. But basically, you know, map out all the concepts that you're presenting, or your objectives, etc., for your course. And then take your assignments and your exams and overlay that onto the course concept map. And just see if it is alignment or not. Quite often you'll find out that you ask one question on these 3 classes, but 15 questions on this one concept. Maybe that's appropriate for your course, maybe it isn't. But I find it very enlightening to look at, because then you will really see, are the assessments and the evaluation that I'm conducting really aligned to what the whole course has been about. And the one thing that kind of like really brought this to my mind was, my daughter is at the university, and she come home one day after a final exam, and she just she used the words like, well, that sucked. And I said, how bad was it? And she said, well, it wasn't, I think I passed, so that's okay. But she said, there were some questions on there that were really unfair. And I said, you know, it's like when you dad-daughter kind of relationship. I said, well, tell me what was unfair then. And she said, you know what? There were questions about the instructor's dog. What was the name? What was favorite food? And I said, why? And my daughter just turned around and said, I think that was because that was the one way to ensure we were in the presentation when there was a guest speaker that day. And to fill the few minutes before the guest speaker was ready, the instructor told a story about her dog. But my daughter said, where is that in the course objectives? And I had to turn around and said, yeah, Selena, that sucks. You're right. I can't defend that. But I think making that course concept map is really enlightening. And I think that might then show to us all how aligned are things and how fair is it the way we're assessing.
Is that something you give the students? I mean, you've got something like that, this concept map that it's on your website or something.
Hey, often I do it in the course itself. I'll show them where we've been, where we're going to, how the assignment and the exams match up. Often, and I'll work it with them so that they're telling me the concepts.
Okay, we're going to have to interrupt you guys. And you guys
Sorry.
continue this on
Yeah.
afterwards. If anybody wants to listen, you can. But I want to thank Candy and Alex and Clive for honest, thoughtful comments that I think have given us lots to think about. And I think that this is a success if you picked up one good tip or if you actually had one original thought. Lots of times if I go to a seminar like this, I get one good original thought, then I go back and change what I do. So I hope that happened for you. And I thank all of you for showing up. And I also want to thank Sheree Kwong-Si for her leadership at CTL. I think it's really going well. So very good. Thanks, you guys. Thank you. Thank you. You guys could